It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Stephanie Pugliese, President of the Americas for Under Armour. Stephanie has been President of the Americas for Under Armour since June of 2020, and prior to that, she served as President of North America starting back in 2019. Prior to joining Under Armour, Stephanie served as Chief Executive Officer and President of Duluth Trading Company from 2015 to 2019, where she also held roles as Chief Operating Officer, Senior Vice President, Chief Merchandising Officer, and as Vice President of Product for over a decade. Early in her career, Stephanie also served in various leadership roles with Land's End and at Ann Taylor. She achieved her bachelor's degree in business from New York University's Stern School of Business and loves New York City. Stephanie Pugliese, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you so much, Brent. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. I know we spoke a couple of months ago, and I know you've been back on the road, I think gladly so, right? We're
absolutely
moving into year 2 in the pandemic, and oh my goodness, people are getting vaccinated, and then things are starting to open up a little bit. But let's just kind of start off with you. How are you? How is your family? And how have your colleagues been at Under Armour through this, somewhat challenging and difficult time?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for making that my first question, because I think it's something that's been obviously one of the biggest things we've all been going through for the past little over a year now.
Right.
I would start with the team at Under Armour. I am just incredibly proud of how everyone has been handling the challenges from a work perspective. Obviously, everybody has their own personal challenges through this, and they've just done extraordinary work. So I have to give them an absolute big high five for all the things that they've been able to accomplish. On the family side, I've been very, very lucky in that our family has been healthy. We've come through this past year or so, I'll say relatively unscathed, in that most importantly, we all have our health, as I said. And, I have 3 children who have had kind of different forms of challenges in this past year. Sure. And, we're all just kind of learning our way through it. I've been grateful that we've had some additional family time, particularly last year in the beginning of kind of the shutdown, and that for the most part, my kids, my husband, and myself have been able to live, as normally as the new normal is overall.
Yeah. And where is home now? Are you at the headquarters there at Under Armour? Have you been in Wisconsin for the most part? Where have you spent, I guess, the last year really is my question.
Yeah, I've spent most of the last year in Madison, Wisconsin. It's where I was when I joined Under Armour a year and a half ago or so. Right. I had planned to stay there and allow my son to finish his school year when I first joined Under Armour. And then COVID happened and, things continued to change. But yeah, so I've been based out of Madison for the most part, done a little bit of travel back and forth to Baltimore, and certainly out to our stores as much as I've been able to.
Right. That's awesome. Terrific. Well, let's start with your early life and tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what was that early life like? Your parents, siblings, where did you grow up, and what were some of the activities you were involved with early on?
Sure. So I would characterize my childhood as really very normal. And it was, I have a younger sister. So one sibling, she's 3 years younger than I am. And my mom and dad were very present, great parents. My
Yes.
dad owned his own small painting company
Oh,
for most of my childhood.
right.
And my mom worked in a bakery. She worked in a law firm at one point, and she worked in a flower shop for it at one point as well. So I think her experiences kind of rubbed off on me in terms of my love of cooking, my
Right.
love of
Good.
gardening. So I definitely had some great input from her from what she did for work and what she did outside of the home. But I would say that my parents, one of the greatest gifts that my parents gave me in that very kind of traditional, if you will, childhood in the 70s and 80s
Mm.
was the belief that I had just great things ahead of me.
Mm. Nice.
And they valued my opinion even from a
Yeah.
really young age, and listened to me. And so for me, while I might not have had all of the, let's call it worldly experiences, if you will, that some people have today, I had an incredible amount of support and worldly vision from
Right.
my family.
Yeah.
And so I think that has been probably, if I think about my my childhood and how my parents raised both my sister and myself, the greatest gift they gave us was that confidence
Mm.
and that open eyes and really just absolute curiosity about learning new things and experiencing new things.
So important. What part of the country did you grow up in?
I grew up partly in central Pennsylvania in the
Okay.
Harrisburg area. That's where I was
Right.
born and lived until about junior high
Yeah.
level. And then we moved to the suburbs of New York City, an area called Nyack in Rockland
Oh,
County.
yeah.
That's where I
Sure.
went to
Know
high
that.
school.
Yeah. Were you a good student?
Yeah, I was absolutely.
High achiever, I take it,
I
right?
was a good student, and I was like, darn it, I will be a good student. So I was
It was
definitely one
part
of
of that
those.
creative structure that your parents gave you, right? Because if you can be anything, you've really got to do a lot to get there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. They
Yeah.
they in addition to giving me that freedom, they set the bar high,
Right.
right?
Sure.
And yeah, so I was definitely one of those kids that was raising their hands really high from the front row, because I just wanted to answer the question. And I actually really loved school.
Mm.
And I loved learning, and I loved reading, and I loved exploring.
Yeah.
So I think more so perhaps than any natural brain cell ability, I think it was just that curiosity and that drive to always learn that made me a really good student.
Now, you're obviously now president of a very successful company, Under Armour. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But being in the sports, equipment, sports apparel, as well as other accessories, was sports big to you growing up, or not so much?
No, it was really important to me, but I
Yeah.
think for a different reason than perhaps some of the athletes that I
Mm.
get to work with and communicate with each day at Under
Yeah.
Armour. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is, I have the just absolute honor of meeting and talking and working with athletes that have achieved just incredible things in my
Yeah.
role today. I was not one of those incredible athletes. But for me, what sports did was it gave me an opportunity to be part of a team
Yeah.
and to think about how and really work on working together and achieving something kind of greater than individuals can
Yeah.
do.
Right.
So you think about the schoolwork, that's very individual.
Of
Obviously there are
course.
group projects and things like that, but that's a very, very much an individual sport, if you will.
Right.
But team sports really brought a different aspect to my experience in school and
Mm.
as a high schooler. So I can't say that I was, going to win any national championships personally, but I absolutely valued the participation and what sports gave me. And it also gave me a lifelong love of being fit, being active, and just feeling really strong physically.
Were you involved in the entrepreneurial things as you were growing up?
Yeah, I still remember when I was, gosh, I was probably fifth grade. And I remember there was a company that would send you greeting cards, and you
Hmm.
could go door to door and sell
Right.
greeting cards.
Yeah. I think I
You
did that
know,
as well. I
okay,
remember that
yeah,
well.
I'm
Yeah.
totally dating myself. I completely admit that. But I remember doing really well. And I think I earned like
Huh.
35 whole dollars in commission. And I was richer than rich, in fifth grade. But I did that. I had a paper route for
Yeah.
several years. My
Wow. Cool.
parents, I mentioned, what they did. But at one point in when I was in high school, my parents opened up a deli in the town
Oh,
that I went to high school. And so
right.
I worked in the deli in the mornings before school, after school, and I learned, I learned the spirit of entrepreneurship and,
Mm,
quite frankly, the challenges, right, and all the
sure.
hard work it takes to build even a small business.
Yeah.
And you get just a really great appreciation for not only the physical work, but just the mental fortitude you have to
Right.
have when you own your own business and
Yeah.
your family is counting on you in that very direct way.
Did you do part-time jobs in high school and college as well?
Did part-time jobs, in high school. I mentioned the deli.
Yeah.
My uncle had his own cleaning business, so I would help him on weekends clean offices. In college, I waitressed a lot, a very, I think, pretty uh, common thing
Right.
that college
Sure.
students do. And I worked for the Gap in their
Yeah.
store in Lower Manhattan. I went to NYU's
Ah,
business school,
yeah.
so that's where I kind of got a little bit of the retail bug.
Right.
But I honestly, I can't remember a time from, age probably 14 on where I wasn't working
Yeah.
even part
Yeah.
time pretty
Yeah.
steadily.
So you went to NYU. I think you were living, you said in Nyack in the New York area. Was that kind of a predetermined, conclusion that you'd go to NYU? Was that your school of choice, or did you take a look around at some others? How did you kind of make that decision as to where to go?
It was my predetermined decision,
Yeah.
school of choice. So Nyack is about a 30-minute on a good day drive
Right.
into Manhattan, 2 hours on
Right.
a bad day, right?
Yeah.
And so my family and I, as I was in high school, would spend time in New York and just, kind of walking around the city and
Right.
enjoying different things. And so I fell in love with New York
Yeah.
really quickly.
Yeah.
And I actually had a pretty unusual path to NYU in that I had had an experience as a junior in high school with just some introductions to different colleges, as juniors are looking around. And something came across just my knowledge that certain schools at that time did what was called an early admission program,
Right.
where they would accept students coming out of their junior year instead of going all the way through the senior year of high
Mm,
school,
yeah.
and allow them to, in essence, combine their senior year of high school with their freshman year of college. So I
Yeah.
actually reached out to NYU and asked if they were doing that
Yeah.
program, and they
Wow.
were.
Wow.
So I applied as a junior in
As a
high
junior.
school to
Yeah.
NYU. I was
Wow.
accepted to that program. And so I actually moved on campus
Went there
a
early.
month
Yeah.
before I turned 17. So I was 16
Wow.
and
Wow.
16 and 11 months living in downtown New York in 1987.
Wow.
So
Fantastic. Yeah.
that's another one, though, I have to say, as an example of my parents and how
Hmm.
incredibly supportive and open-minded they were. There are not a lot of families that
No.
would take that chance for their kid,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my parents did, and it was just extraordinary,
Yeah.
really amazing
Awesome.
blessing in my life.
Now, I think you joined Ann Taylor, right out of school and spent about a decade there. How
I
did you
did.
kind of go through that selection process of getting into merchandising and deciding that's where you wanted to be?
Well, I in my last semester, it could have even been my last year of NYU, I had I was a marketing major. So
Right.
part of my marketing classes or options were retail marketing, and consumer insights. That's what we call it today. I can't remember what the class
Right.
exactly was called, back then, but, it was very interesting to me, to be able to think about, the science of marketing
Mm.
and how you run a business with combining it with, something I loved, which was fashion.
Right.
And
Right.
as my mom would probably say, really, it was a love of buying clothes. And I would say
We had to
they're
spend that
both
money on something, right,
they're
Stephanie?
both true. Yeah, exactly. All of that part-time work I was doing, I
Yeah,
got to
exactly.
buy a few things. Um, but so I had the opportunity to, think about kind of blending something that I really liked with a
Right.
job opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
when the opportunity that came up to work in an industry that I was interested in,
Mm.
exercise my, marketing degree, if you will, and get a 30% plus discount on clothes.
Not necessarily in that order.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. My 21-year-old brain at the time
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
this is a
Yeah.
big
This is
score.
it. Yeah.
This
Oh, and Ann
is,
Taylor was in her prime then, right? I mean,
and
that was
Taylor's
just,
amazing.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific company to join.
So yeah,
And
absolute prime.
tell us a little bit about coming in. I mean, it was the mid '90s, right, when you got out of school, or early mid '90s. Was it difficult for women at that time to advance, even in a women-owned and branded company?
I have been, I think, very fortunate all along in my career
Mm,
where, I have been given opportunities that I know are not necessarily readily available to women at large.
mm, mm.
And I think part of that, if I think back to Ann Taylor in that, kind of 1992,
Yeah,
1993 timeframe,
yeah.
it was a business that, quite frankly, I don't know the exact percent, but if memory serves, it was 95% plus women
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
offices
yeah.
there,
She
and
she was
certainly in our
famous for that.
stores.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
And so it was a very, supportive
Right,
environment for
right,
women. In fact, in a lot of ways, I don't even think we thought about it,
right,
in
right.
that it was about, there was a lot of gender equality because, quite frankly, we were relatively
You're the
unequal in
dominant
terms of
gender.
our proportion. Yeah.
Right, right.
And so much of it was really based on the work that you were doing,
Performance. Yeah,
the
yeah.
performance, the results that you were achieving.
Right,
And there
right.
wasn't a whole lot of talk
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
kind of obligation to be for equality.
yeah.
Now, not that it wasn't going on around us. I don't want to say that in any naive way, but I didn't really experience it at that
Right,
time.
right. Do you remember the first time you started managing people, Stephanie?
Yes, I was promoted to, a merchandiser, a buyer
Right.
at Ann Taylor,
Yeah.
and, absolutely incredibly excited. Felt that I had, won the lottery. I had finally achieved all my goals. I think I was 23, and I was on top of the world. And then I suddenly, I kind of looked around, my cubicle, and there were two young women looking at me saying,
Right.
okay, well, what do you want us to do?
Wow.
And I was
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? So I actually remember going to my boss at the time and saying, I need a management training class,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she was like, here's the management training class, go out and use your assistants,
Yeah. Go
and
figure it out.
she
Were they about
certainly
the
helped
same
me and
age?
mentored.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They about the same age as
about
you,
the
were
same
they?
age. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, I would say that, a good portion of my career has been managing and leading teams that are about my same age, if
Peer
not
level. Yeah.
older in some
Right.
cases.
Right. Right.
And so I think the biggest challenge, and the first time that anyone gets that position where they're suddenly, responsible not only for their own individual work, but for the work of others,
Right.
is jarring,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And it is probably one of the biggest transitions that you make in your career.
Sure.
And, if you're successful, it often happens very early in your
Right.
career
Right.
when you may not be experience ready for it. You may not
Sure.
be age ready for it fully.
Right.
And certainly you may not even have all of the skill sets yourself
Yeah.
in your role to be able to translate that to a team that's looking up to you.
Right.
So it was a
Right.
very interesting time, very important time. I think that the communication that I tried to establish, I'm sure I didn't do it extremely well at that point in my career, and the teamwork mentality that I tried to establish with those two assistants early on has kind of helped me build on that from that point forward. And I hope I'm a little better at it today than I was that many years ago. But
any other leadership lessons from those early years that you can recall?
I think the biggest thing, and I would say that I didn't do this well at that point, but I learned it from others, was humility in leadership. And I think that is one of the challenges as you either get that first team or get bigger teams or get teams that have functional areas that you don't know anything about, is that I think we often have this feeling that to be a great leader, you have to project that you know exactly what's going to happen next and and where you need to go. And I think actually projecting the humility to listen and learn, and then provide confident direction to the team is probably one of the most important things that I continue to learn even to this day.
It's hard to learn that early.
Yes.
Right. Particularly when you're an overachiever and, just trying to be the best and getting everything done. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Mentoring, of course, is something that there's a lot of books written about it and, what's important. Did you find that as well? And let's, maybe take your, beyond. I know you went to Land's End, spent another decade at Duluth Trading, probably more men-centric organizations or maybe even better balanced. Were there older mentors, men or women, that helped you along the way? And if so, what were some of the lessons that you picked up in that regard?
Absolutely. I have been very fortunate to have mentors both formally and quite frankly, people that I just kind of spied on and copied, throughout my career, because I admired either the way that they presented in a large group or the way that they created a process that helped, ensure better execution.
Right.
But I think that the lessons that I've learned kind of in aggregate from the more formal mentors that I've had are that you bring something to the table, but you don't bring everything to the table. And as a leader, our job is to, and I give this credit actually to my executive coach, who I'm very close with, and we've worked together for a number of years now. She always uses the term, it's my job to give oxygen to the team and to provide that air for them to be able to breathe more deeply, and go off and be great. And I think that is a huge lesson. I think the other lesson that I've learned is my greatest mentors were also really great people.
Yeah.
And I think that there is still, although I think it's getting a lot better, particularly lately, I think there's still this misconception that to be a great leader, you have to be mean or, or
dominant,
difficult, or dominant.
Not humble.
Exactly.
Right.
And I actually think my greatest mentors have shown me that the exact opposite is true. And you have to be empathetic and you have to be humble and you have to be a good person, because at the end of the day, people will work for a jerk, but not for long. Right?
Right. Exactly.
And that's a huge lesson that I've learned with the mentors that I've truly admired.
Right. Now you achieved your CEO position and president of Duluth Trading. You're obviously were in that role before being recruited over to Under Armour. Tell us a little bit about that transition, because you'd been there for maybe almost close to a dozen years. Perhaps you felt that was where you're going to stay for some time, and yet the Under Armour opportunity came along. Was that a difficult transition for you? And if so, tell us a little bit about how you went through that decision making to join the great company you're with now.
Yeah, I would characterize it as the easiest and most difficult decision I've ever made.
Two sides of that coin, right?
Yeah, simple, very easy. Easiest because I have been a longtime admirer of the Under Armour brand, and there is a visceral joy,
connection.
When you think about what this brand stands for and the athletes that we serve and how we are striving every single day to make people better, and when I think, I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that I was never the greatest athlete, but that my participation in sports was one of the most important things to me. Right. That was the kind of gut reaction and pull towards Under Armour. Yeah. And when you combine that with a really unbelievably big opportunity as a professional to join a brand that is internationally recognized and obviously internationally based, if you will, it has the combination of both direct to consumer and wholesale. So you've got partnerships that reach differently and in some ways wider than what I had experienced before. And, obviously the volume is significant, and the amount of teammates that we have that I hopefully can influence and do good for, was just an incredible opportunity. Yeah. Now, so that's the easy part, right? In the choice. The most difficult part is that the team that, obviously I needed to then leave from Duluth is part of my family. And
you've been there a long time. Yeah.
And when I speak of mentors that I've had, Steve Schlecht, who is the founder and current executive chairman of Duluth, is absolutely counted among the top of those mentors. And I owe a lot of my learnings and a lot of what I have been able to accomplish over that part of my career to the partnership that I had with Steve. Right. And I'm just super darn proud of what I was able to participate in and lead in that business. The growth, the ability to take that company public in 2015. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity for many people.
Yeah.
And so that was just an extraordinary, big part of my life and my career. And I will be eternally grateful for that experience.
Yeah. Really hard one to leave, I can imagine. Tell us a little bit about your organization today. Now, was this a new position when you came over to Under Armour, or had that exist previously?
The position of president of North America had existed previously. The decision, as you mentioned in kind of the introduction, about 6 months or so after I joined, 7 months or so, we did make the decision to consolidate North America and expand it to include Latin America. Creating, I guess you could say, the new region of the Americas. So that position is new. But overall, it's a very similar position to what existed before.
Yeah. How many people in that organization, and kind of what's your relative size?
So we the North America team represents about 70% of the entire global
business.
Team.
Yeah.
And so, we include teammates that are obviously, based, and with COVID, people are a little bit in different places, but based out of our Baltimore offices, we have teams in Panama, in Canada, in Mexico, and then, of course, obviously within our stores throughout the entire region.
Yeah. Now, is the founder still involved in the business day to day? I think he kind of took a step back a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So Kevin Plank, he stepped back from the CEO role last January in 2020, and Patrick Frisk, who was the president when he joined in 2017, became the CEO with Kevin's transition. But Kevin is still chairman of the board, so he still obviously plays a role in the business. And the legacy and the culture that he built through serving athletes still remains a strong bright spot for us today.
He's a very impressive speaker. I think I mentioned to you when we spoke a couple of months ago as we prepared for the podcast, I heard him back in 2013, I think it was. It was a middle market conference that GE Capital had sponsored, and he was one of the guest speakers. So I was one of thousands, of course, in the audience, but he impressed me as someone who really understood that company culture and where it was going. How difficult is it, or maybe how easy is it to kind of continue on that legacy? I mean, I know that Kevin's still involved, not so much in the day-to-day, but, tell us a little bit about how you do that at Under Armour.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is when you think about the heart and soul of Under Armour, 25 years ago, it was to be of service to athletes, to innovate, to create products that empowered those athletes to do better every single day. And that is certainly a product vision, at its, I guess you could call it most basic. But most importantly, it is a purpose that we have as an organization. And so that thread of why we came into existence is still the central point of why we exist today. Yeah. And certainly, the business has gotten exponentially, and that's an understatement, bigger from when Kevin started, in his grandma's basement. More than 2 decades ago. And we've expanded internationally, and we have thousands of teammates. So the business has evolved really significantly, and we've evolved how we do business in many ways to respond to the business climate, to respond to the needs of our athletes. But at the end of the day, that core central principle still holds very true. Yeah. And, we still, when you think about our company culture, you probably have noticed I talk about, our, what would be called employees in other places are our teammates, our consumers, our athletes. Our athletes range from people who are,
out there for a fast, brisk walk.
Out there for a fast, brisk walk, training for a first triathlon. 5K, or training for an Ironman, And so that culture of serving people who want to do more is just incredibly important to us.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a very, very strong cultural and what a unique fit in the marketplace too. Because I don't think anybody has really owned that better than Under Armour has over the last 25 years. And, just so well known for that. You're obviously hiring people and bringing new folks on. Stephanie, what do you look for when you're making bets on those people you invest in?
That's a really good question. I think I'm in somewhat of a privileged position now in that by the time that I am involved in an interview process, the majority of the time, skill set has been vetted.
Yes.
Right? We know that the person can tactically do the job. So what my role in looking for people is truly about a fit in the organization. Sure. And you'll often hear the term cultural fit. I think that's somewhat appropriate. And, the spirit of it is correct. But really what I'm looking for is somebody that is going to thrive in our organization. And thriving oftentimes means that they have an appreciation for what we're doing. A lot of times at Under Armour, for example, we will talk to people who were former athletes at, fairly high levels. And so that type of thing is important. But for me, what's more important is that a person brings a curiosity to the table, that they bring a humility and a willingness to learn, and an ability to bring a different opinion, and to be open-minded to new possibilities, and that they are bringing their whole self to the conversation. So I love when I am talking to somebody who's had a very different background than I have had, or than some of our other leaders or teammates have had, because I know that person's going to come at a problem most likely from a different angle, and give us some additional visibility to new solutions.
So do you kind of do case study questions? What's kind of your interview style? How do you get at that? Because it's hard, right? It's very hard to be able to determine that, particularly in a 20-minute interview or 30-minute interview.
I think if I had to boil it all down to a couple of key questions on the experience side, or how do you kind of approach things, I will ask questions like, tell me the worst day you had in your job, where you were the most disappointed. What happened and what did you do about it? And so that kind of gives me insights into, were they disappointed because they didn't want to hear no? Were they disappointed because they didn't meet their own expectations? Were they disappointed because of whatever? And more importantly, how did they get up after they got knocked down? The other things that I ask, that I sometimes, even through Zoom meetings now, will get kind of the one eyebrow up look, is I will oftentimes start with, what do you do when you're not working? Because I want to know if somebody is just only working, or if they have a broader, more open view of the world that they bring to the equation. And the third thing I ask people is, what are you reading right now? And that always gives me some good insights. And I actually am not looking necessarily for the, well, I'm reading Good to Great, or I'm reading, how to make friends and influence people, or, like I'm actually just looking for, I'm reading, first of all, because I'm curious, and just kind of where they get their passion from,
learn about the genre they like to enjoy from a literary standpoint.
And I mean, I've had some really awesome interview conversations around Stephen King. And just a shared appreciation for an author that I think is truly brilliant. I try to just get into, how do you think, I guess.
What are you reading right now, Stephanie?
So I do two things. I tend to read books for pleasure, and I am old school, like paper.
Gotta have the hardback.
Want to carry it with me, want to touch it, want to smell it. And in that area, I actually just started, and when I say just started, I'm on like page 10, a book called New York by Edward Rutherford that I discovered, and it is I think it covers like 300 years of New York, and it is, probably, I don't know, 800 pages, 900 pages, but New York is just, will always be in my heart and soul. So I'm super interested in kind of seeing, it's a historical novel, but it'll be fun to see kind of the different ages of New York. And then the second thing that I do is, when I am interested or looking for I guess you would call it more business book, or even more kind of self-awareness book, I tend to listen to those books on Audible, because for some reason I absorb that kind of information better when I'm out on a run or a walk. And that book that I'm listening to right now is called The Confidence Code by Claire Shipman, which is a fantastic insight into the importance of confidence, and largely, number one, how we can help to build confidence in ourselves, and if we're parents in our children, but it's also got a great kind of perspective on women and confidence and kind of how that is an opportunity for us and how it also can set very talented, capable women back if they don't own their own selves, and their own abilities.
Yeah, cool.
Great book.
Well, Stephanie, we're almost out of time, but we always ask one last question of all our featured guests. And, that's kind of what career and life advice would you give to someone that maybe has their eyes on the corner office, maybe has been in corporate jobs like you, growing into, larger organizations. And, what's kind of the secret sauce to your success?
I would say that while it is absolutely about being good at your job and making the connections, both in terms of your mentors and the people that you work with and admire, as well as skill sets that you're building, I would say do not ignore the life skill sets that you also need to build. Yeah. Don't ignore empathy. Don't ignore seeing the world. Don't ignore connecting with people that have absolutely nothing to do with your career, but offer your soul, kind of a bigger place. And because I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to the very beginning when you asked me about, was I good at school? Yes, I was good at school, but that was not the only thing. And had I been only good at school, maybe I would have been still in this position from a career perspective, but my life certainly wouldn't have been as rich.
Fantastic. Stephanie Pugliese, president of the Americas at Under Armour, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Handley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.